Hey, Ohio, it is September 3rd, 2025, and I'm going to talk about property taxes in Ohio more today. I know I've done a lot of videos about this, but I think it's really important that we understand why we are in this property tax crisis right now, what has happened historically over years in Ohio to lead us here, and what we can do to fix it without gutting funding for public schools and local communities, okay? So I'm gonna jump in. Property taxes, how do we calculate them in our state? Well, we calculate them by something called the assessed home value times your millage rate, okay? Your assessed home value is basically the fair market value of your home, and this is determined by a reappraisal process through your county auditor's office. It happens every 6 years, and then there's like a mini appraisal that happens every 3 years, and they determine your fair market value, and then they take it times 35%, and then that is your assessed home value. Now, millage rate, what is that? So think of mills as kind of taxes or like a tax rate on your property. So there's inside mills, outside mills. Outside mills are taxes that are voted on by you, right? This is when you see a levy on the ballot for your public school or for a fire department. That is outside millage. Inside millage are taxes that are not voted on, right? That you don't get to vote on. And in our Ohio Constitution, localities get a 10 mil guarantee, right? So they can put 10 mils towards basically this property tax calculation without asking the voters for permission. And when we combine inside millage and outside millage and divide it by 1,000, you get the millage rate, okay? Well, recently, right, we have seen a lot of people's property taxes in Ohio go up exponentially, all right? Some a lot higher than others. And so why is that? Well, a lot of that is because people's home values, their home values were reappraised at much higher values than they were the last time they were reappraised, because it's the first time they've been appraised since the COVID pandemic. And what happened during the COVID pandemic? We saw a supply-demand mismatch of housing, right? So the supply chain was messed up. It was more expensive to build homes, so people weren't building affordable homes. So supply drops then, and demand is still high. Mortgage rates dropped really low in the beginning of the pandemic, right, to stimulate the economy. And what we saw is people locked in or refinanced their mortgages and they stayed in their homes with that low mortgage rate. Or a lot of people did buy homes at that time, which again took supply off the market. And then also we've seen during that time and over years in Ohio, and seems to be getting worse and worse over time, when there is a low supply and a high demand, who gets those properties? It's people with capital. And we've seen institutions backed by private equity buying up tons of homes, thousands across Ohio, okay? And they're able to outbid single families that are looking for the first time affordable home because they have the capital to do so and they pay cash, right? And so they get to buy up all these homes, take them off the market, and what does that do? Again, it worsens the supply-demand issue and drives up housing prices for everybody. That is part of the reason we are in this position now and why people's home values went up so much. Now, I mentioned that some people's home values went up a lot and some people didn't go up that much. Why is that? Well, we need to look back to something called HB 920, okay? Back in the mid-1970s, we had rising inflation. There was a problem, and people's home values, just like now, were going up. And then their property taxes were exponentially going up. So what lawmakers did was they introduced HB 920, which protects taxpayers from increases on voter-approved levies as property values rise. They call it like a safety valve or like a tax reduction factor, right? So when your home value goes up, it kind of does this reduction over here on this outside millage part to make it even so that your property taxes stay relatively steady over time. Yes, they're going to increase a little bit, but it's not going to shoot up if your home value all of a sudden is 35% higher than the last time it was appraised, right? So that was helpful. However, there was a problem, right? And it was schools, public school funding. And in Ohio, as I've talked about before, public schools are funded by two mechanisms, by property taxes and through our state budget. And I'm going to dive into that in a little bit. But what they realized is, okay, with HB 920, what's happening is schools then are going to get shorted on funding, especially in districts where levies, it's hard to pass, right? And so they created something called the 20 mil floor shortly after HB 920 passed. And what the 20 mil floor does is it guarantees 20 mils in funding, okay, for public schools, and it's a guardrail against HB 920 from underfunding public schools, okay? And so why there's been such a basically disparity in people, some people's property taxes going through the roof and some people just going up a little bit, is because if your school district is at or below that 20 mil floor, you don't get the HB 920 tax reduction here. So whatever percentage your home value went up by, that's the percentage basically your property taxes went up by. Whereas districts that have higher, they're already contributing higher than 20 mils to their public school district, they get the protection of HB 920. And so it kept their property taxes from going too high. And Signal Cleveland did a great story about this, and I will link the graphic here, because it's a great kind of overall view of all the different districts through Ohio and who is at that 20 mil floor, who's below it, and then who is above it, okay? Now, as I said before, public schools are funded by property taxes and through our state budget in Ohio. Now, we have been unconstitutionally funding schools because we rely too heavily on property taxes to do it. This was ruled by the Supreme Court in the 1990s, and we still do it because the Republican leaders that have been in charge of our state for the last 30 years continue to skirt their responsibility to appropriately fund our public schools through our state budget, which puts it back on property owners through property taxes, okay? Now, enter the bipartisan fair school funding plan, okay? This was a bill introduced in 2021, okay? A bipartisan bill introduced by a Democrat and a Republican lawmaker, okay? It was heavily researched. And what that bill was going to do was shift away from heavy reliance on property taxes, and it would equitably and predictably fund public education through our state budget, okay? Now, this bipartisan fair school funding plan had a 6-year rollout. We were in the 4th year of the rollout when we had our most recent budget talks in Ohio. And the Republican lawmakers in our statehouse decided they didn't want to honor the bipartisan fair school funding plan anymore. They gave a underfunded, watered down version of this, and they messed with the formula so that it no longer is going to equitably or predictably fund public schools. Again, skirting the responsibility to fund public schools through our state budget. Why does this matter in the scheme of all of this? Well, if we were to have implemented in its entirety the bipartisan fair school funding plan with updated inputs that accounted for inflation, we likely could get rid of the 20 mil floor, right? The 20 mil floor that's preventing these communities from being able to have HB 920, the tax reduction factor that decreases their property taxes when their home value keeps going up. And that would help a lot of communities, right? And so it is policy, poor policy decisions that continue to lead to the property tax crisis we're in. And those policy decisions have been made by the Republicans in our statehouse. Another thing that they have done over time is they have cut income taxes for the wealthiest in our state. They have done this continuously since 2005, over and over, and we just saw them recently pass a flat income tax rate, which gives the biggest handout to the wealthiest people in the state in income tax cuts. What does that do? It causes us to lose billions and billions of dollars in revenue over time, and we have, which we could be using in our general revenue fund to pay for public education funding, so we don't have to rely so heavily on property taxes to do so. But they don't want to do that. They want to keep giving tax breaks to their wealthy friends, right? Because the wealthy people are connected, right? It's a lot of pay to play. Also, what they've done over the years is they have shrunk basically the percentage of which our general revenue fund contributes to something called the local government fund, right? So the local government fund comes out of basically the state budget, which is funded by our general revenue fund. And there's a percentage that goes to local government to help fund services so that we don't have to keep putting levies on the ballot to increase millage, which increase people's property taxes. Now, when John Kasich was in office, he slashed this. It used to be like 3.68% that went to the local government fund out of the overall general revenue fund. Now it's, I think, it went down then to one, he slashed it to 1.66. Now it's only at 1.7. So again, they are squeezing money. They are taking away money from local government services that makes your property taxes go up. So what do we need to do? We need to tell them that they are not working for us, that this crisis that they've created is unacceptable, and we need to vote them out of office. We need to vote them out of office. And right now, you're going to see them with this working group, this property tax working group, what they are doing. You'll see every single piece of legislation they try to put forth or idea they put forth to give property tax relief to people. It comes at the expense of public school funding or local community service funding. That's it. And I think at this point, the MO of the Republicans in our state house is to defund public schools, and they are getting there using the reason of the property tax crisis and giving fake property tax relief by cutting funding to schools. I think that's their MO. They could be giving immediate tax relief to those most in need right now by increasing the homestead exemption for seniors, right? So seniors aren't taxed out of their home, and they could be doing something called the property tax circuit breaker to ensure that low income individuals and families are not taxed out of their homes. They are not doing any of that. But overall, they need to fund local services like public education through our state budget. So hold them accountable. Do not let them off the hook for this, and make your voices heard when it comes to voting for them. All of them are up for election. All of the House of Representatives in the Ohio State House are up for re-election in November 2026, and half of our state senators are up for re-election. You know what to do.